Welcome to the third podcast in our short series on interdisciplinary teaching and learning in a higher education context. In this session, just like in previous sessions, we will be focusing in on the Cambridge Foundation Year as a particular case study that might tell us about broader pedagogical issues. Launched with its first cohort in September 2022, the Foundation Year is a one-year programme in the arts, humanities and social sciences. It is designed to offer a stepping stone to the University of Cambridge for talented students who have been prevented from realising their potential due to educational disadvantage or disruption. If you're interested in learning more about what the programme involves and entails, you can look for the Foundation Year pages on the Cambridge University website. Or you could make sure you listen to the first podcast in this series, which offers a more fine-grained look at the curriculum that our students study, as well as the types of assessment they have. Today, what we're going to discuss together are questions around student support. These questions include the following. What kinds of student support are required as accompaniments for an interdisciplinary curriculum? Answering this perhaps means thinking about the particular challenges that such a curriculum poses. What kinds of support are required for helping young people with the academic and intellectual transition from school to university? And what support might students on the Foundation Year in particular benefit from? That is, students who faced educational disruption as well as disadvantage in the years leading up to university. And finally, what are good practices when it comes to supporting disabled students? In order to discuss these issues and more, I am joined by three guests today. Marika Dunt is a teaching associate on the Foundation Year programme, where she is particularly responsible for teaching papers that are focused on questions around language and linguistics, including historical linguistics and sociolinguistics. She also teaches the beginner's Latin course that students can choose to study alongside the programme. What would you say, Marika, is your disciplinary home as a teacher and an academic?
So I did my undergraduate and my master's in classics, and then for my PhD I moved into theology and religious studies. And ever since my PhD I have been going back and forth between departments of religious studies and departments of classics. So I'm very much in that in-between space.
And both of those departments in themselves are interdisciplinary, right? So you're in this kind of real maelstrom of interdisciplinary activity. Well, thank you for being with us today to discuss everything. I've got Deb Taylor with me, who is the Disability Advisor on the Foundation Year. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means, Deb?
As a Disability Advisor, my role within the university is to provide advice and guidance to students who have a diagnosed disability, to students who feel they may have a disability, to staff members working with disabled students. The aim is looking at the barriers that might be there and looking to reduce and remove them as far as possible.
Thank you. You're going to have a really important perspective to offer our conversation today. And our final guest today is one of our current students on the Foundation Year. Hello, Ollie. Could you tell us what would you like to study after the Foundation Year?
Yeah, so I want to study history and politics after Foundation Year. Originally, I wanted to study HSPS, so Human, Social and Political Sciences, but a big part of the Foundation Year is studying all different kind of papers which you maybe wouldn't have studied beforehand, and it spiked my interest in different areas like archaeology and history and politics. So it's been changing, but I've chosen that I think history and politics would be best for me after the Foundation Year.
Oh, excellent. And it sounds like studying the programme has really helped you sort of firm up that ambition. One of the many reasons we asked you to come on the podcast today is because you have a particular role at your college, don't you?
Yeah.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about that role?
Yeah, so I'm the JCR Disability and Mental Illness Officer at Fitzwilliam College. So for those who don't know, a JCR is a bit like a mini student union. So every Cambridge college has their own JCR for the undergrads and then an MCR for the postgrads. The reason why I decided to become the disabilities officer is because before I came to Cambridge, I actually worked as a support worker, and I kind of wanted to carry that on at Cambridge. I didn't want to leave it behind, and I was really adamant that I wouldn't just be focused on studying. I wanted to do other things at the same time, and I just really enjoyed my previous job being a support worker. So that was kind of giving me that route in. So it was really nice, and I get to meet a lot of people. I have my own disabilities, so meeting people with disabilities is nice because it's just a way of communicating with people which a bit more like yourself.
Yeah. So you bring to your studies not only a kind of academic interest, but you've got that kind of experience on your side working as a support worker, and you want to bring to the student community as well. It's really nice. So I'm really looking forward to discussing all of these issues with you today. My name is Ruth Jackson Ravenscroft, and I'm, like Marika, a member of the teaching team on the foundation year. So let's get going. I've got quite a big question to begin with, and I thought I'd aim this primarily at Marika. So we can take some time to unpack this rather big question, but here it is. So on the foundation year, you are responsible for teaching and designing courses for a level 4 curriculum, right? So that means first year undergraduate level. Not only that, but you're working with talented students who've experienced disadvantage and disruption, and they're looking to build up core skills that will serve them well in the future. You know, this for the really challenging and rigorous undergraduate programs, not only here, but perhaps at other universities too. So how do these factors, these things I've just mentioned, go into the way that you go about planning and delivering your teaching? In other words, what key things does a teaching associate on the foundation year need to bear in mind when they're putting their teaching practice together?
I think that's a great question to start. I think one of the challenges that we've had in developing our curriculum has been twofold. One has to do with finding a balance between breadth and depth in each of our papers. We are introducing our students to a whole new way of studying, and also at the same time to a whole new range of concepts, topics, questions. And so we generally don't make any assumptions regarding to the prior knowledge with which students come into the foundation year. And so that means that we introduce a whole range of new concepts, new ideas, new terminology. And we do that in the context of papers that are interdisciplinary, essentially at a level that within the university you see almost at an MPhil level, which is really interesting. And so one of the things that we have to also really consider when we design our teaching is that our students are not just here to learn about the content of the papers that we are teaching, but also very much are here to develop academic skills. And so we don't just focus on what concepts we want them to learn, what key learning outcomes are in terms of the paper itself, the content of the paper, but also academically, how can we help them gain better argumentation skills, better writing skills, better critical analytical skills? And so I think those two things really have informed all the papers that I've taught so far.
Yeah, wow. So you've got these two threads. You've got the content, which it's really interesting to hear you remind me of the fact that usually when you encounter interdisciplinary study, it is actually, as you say, it's people who already have a grounding in particular disciplines and then can do that playfulness of intersecting with others, and that's happening at the master's level, at the higher degree level. So to just start teaching it from the off, as you say, requires that skill acquisition. So it's I completely agree with you. I think that it's really good observations. And at this point, I want to turn to you, Deb, because we had a conversation, didn't we, before we were thinking about this podcast, and as our disability advisor, you said one of the big things that strikes you is how the interdisciplinary nature of this course reflects the intersectional approach that you think you and as well as others sort of take in working with students.
Yeah, I think what I've found to be one of the most effective ways of supporting students is to look at their situation holistically. So you're dealing with the many different parts of their identity. Disability is one thing, but it could be lots of other things are complicated by that, particularly students who are eligible for the foundation year. One of the reasons why they might have missed a lot of schooling or had their schooling disrupted is because of disability, or it could be something else alongside disability. And it's kind of looking at all of those things together, how they intersect and sort of impact on each other. And what I thought was interesting about sort of the interdisciplinary nature of the course is we're kind of inviting students to explore different parts of their identity and different parts of what they're interested in, simply by offering a lot of interesting things to look into. I would also sort of say that each of the papers encourages students to stretch different academic muscles. So you're going to realise fairly quickly you might be interested in one particular aspect, but statistics, it's not your thing. Or it might be, actually, I really get how poetry works, and I like the approach of poetry, but I'm not so hot on sort of the history side of things. And it gives students a chance to learn where their strengths and weaknesses are. And, you know, in part that reflects some of what I do as a disability advisor, where you're kind of going, okay, let's look where your strengths and your weaknesses are and give you some support to improve where you're not so strong and play to those strengths. And also, again, from working with neurodiverse students, one of the big things you can do in terms of teaching is make connections that are meaningful to you as an individual. And again, I think there could be some really interesting stuff with the interdisciplinary model, where somebody learns something on one paper and it's kind of relevant or can be seen to connect to something else. And all of that is going to help somebody remember it and encourage them to bring their experiences to the table. We want people to bring their whole selves to it and feel comfortable doing so. So that's where I'm intrigued by the interdisciplinary model. I think it shows a lot of promise in being able to support the whole student rather than just the academic side, if that makes sense.
That makes absolute sense, yeah.
And I think in allowing and encouraging our students to explore aspects of themselves and bring those aspects to the table, I think that what that requires on our end as teachers is to be flexible in how we teach. So we have, in the interdisciplinary nature of the papers, we're not only encountering a whole range of different disciplines with different epistemologies, but we also ask our students to bring their own experiences to the table, and so that also requires us to pivot where we see it possible to encourage that and accommodate that, and just build on it to help them build their skills and their knowledge capital.
Absolutely. I'm thinking there are a number of papers where this is really abundantly clear. Our colleague Corinne runs a paper on the COVID-19 pandemic, doesn't she, where this is something that everyone in the room has lived through. So it's unavoidable to sort of bring your own experiences to the table and interrogate. This is a data paper, to interrogate the data with one's own experience in mind. There are other papers, like we have our History of the English Language paper, Marika, don't we? When we talk about the relationship between language and identity, and a lot of the analogies that students make when they're drawing connections is their own understanding of their own relationship to language, their own use of slang. And we also, in my own experience, I teach this paper on religion and religion in South Asia. And again, when you're thinking about religion as a phenomenological category, you can't help but think, oh, how might it intersect with an identity like mine or a loved one's identity or someone else that I know. So all of these things do really chime with my own experience of the paper as well, what you're saying. And it is helping our students to gain that sense of how do I relate to my object of study, and how am I, as a student, supposed to bring my own experiences? What are the rules? What are the limits on bringing that experience in? And I think it's really worthwhile to think about that, isn't it?
I think as well that as members of teaching staff, because there's a lot of different things to think about and you're helping students make those connections, you've also had to think and put work into how you present your teaching materials, like Marika was saying. So I was really, really struck by how much the foundation year think in terms of, we use the phrase universal design, of preparing those teaching materials. So I know, for example, notes are always going to be online before the lecture. The fact that you enable lecture recording those kind of things mean that students are given the tools to go back and look at material, recheck it. I think some of the challenges sometimes is teaching students how to use the resources that are available to them. But that also comes back to what the foundation year is for, in that you're not just teaching them the academic concepts. As you were saying, Marika, we're talking about how to argue, how to write an essay, how to use some of those resources that are available to you in a way that is going to be most effective for your way of learning. And I think we're all quite respectful and aware that people have different ways of learning. So I think all of that is very useful as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask a question now that has to do with this journey of learning about how you learn. And it has to do with the induction week that the foundation year puts on for all of its new students. So this is something that happens in September before the term begins in October, and the whole cohort is brought together and it lives residentially together. And I wanted to ask you, Ollie, what sort of things were you getting out of this sort of residential induction week as a student before you started the course?
Yeah, I think there was so much to take out of the foundation year, of this week, right? Firstly, it was like meeting everyone, being able to meet everyone, being able to meet everyone on a cohort, put a face to a name. I think that's probably the most important part of it, and I think that's the bit that sticks with everyone the most. I speak to my friends from other papers, and doing other courses, and they always actually comment about how close the foundation year is, and I think that's all thanks to the foundation year week, because we're able to meet each other. You know, even if you're not in the same friend group, a lot of the friend groups were formed during this week, but if you're not in the same friend group, you still can point to someone and say, I know who that is, I know what college to go to, I know what their interests are, because it is a week of fostering conversation and academic conversation. Actually, a lot of the conversation was quite academically driven. People were interested in, already at a point, what papers and courses do you want to do next year? What do you want to do next year? So that was a really big part of it. And coming from like the disability or like mental, the disability side of it, it's really important to put faces to names for teachers and being comfortable approaching teachers and being comfortable approaching everyone. So like speaking to teachers about what disabilities I suffered with and what I tend to do, and I might miss some lessons, just pre-warning, and I'm not always going to be able to email right before saying I can't come, and being able to do that was really nice. And for me, I think another part of the foundation year week, the reason why it was so useful was because we were going over things in this week which maybe we wouldn't have gone over in the first week, second week, third week of lectures, because we're able to talk about things like plagiarism, how to write an essay, like we're getting to think about these things which people were worried about, and putting those worries to bed before we actually start the lectures and before we start seminars was really important, because the first supervision, so we did a mock supervision during this foundation year week, and supervisions are a bit daunting. You're in a room with a supervisor and it's about 3, 4, 5 of your peers, and you have to bring something to the table, and you're expected to at least bring a comment at least. So when we did the first mock one during the foundation year week, I was really nervous. I thought it went terribly, but actually, because I got that experience out of the way, when I started getting into lectures, supervisions and seminars, I was a lot more myself and I felt a lot more comfortable. And the anxiety side of it, so I was quite anxious for coming to Cambridge. I understood, my experience of sixth form was a lot different to what Cambridge is going to be. So those anxieties come in for the foundation year week, they will kind of alleviate quite quickly, speaking to everyone. And I think the biggest thing was, like I said, going back to it, was thinking about meeting everyone, meeting the teachers and meeting the students as well. I think another thing about it being useful was, like, once again, coming to the West Hub where we study. It was really, really useful because we were able to understand the environment from a disability perspective. Something that really worries me is, okay, am I going to be able to actually access these rooms? Am I going to be able to go back to recordings? Am I going to be able to, do I have to rely on my friends to send me notes, or can I actually just approach the teacher? And that was a big part of it. And once again, all those things were alleviated. So I think overall the week was so positive, because even if you're not someone who's having to think about disabilities in that sense, I'm sure there's always something that you're thinking about. And like I said, even if it was just putting names to faces, that's such a big deal. And I think that's why our cohort is so close, and they stay close even when they go to different courses later on.
Yeah, thank you, Ollie. And I wanted to ask Deb, does some of what Ollie's saying about the ability to sort of see in advance where your lectures are going to be and be able to plan out in advance. Does that resonate with you?
A lot of, coming to university, regardless of who you are or your background or how much you've been thinking about it, particularly if you're thinking about it as somebody with a disability, whatever that is, or, just the fact you might be the first person in your family or your community even to go to university, everything is so new. There's so much to think about. There's not only new people, there's new spaces, there's new ways that you're expected to behave. There's an awful lot of unwritten rules at university, regardless of where you're going. I would say Cambridge is also quite high up in a lot of unwritten rules as well. And I think the induction week is, as Ollie says, that opportunity for everyone to meet each other, for everybody to get information about support that's available or meet their tutors, have a look around their college, have a look around the teaching space. So when they're actually getting on with the academic side of things, that is not so new. They know roughly who they need to go to when things aren't going so well or when they're a little bit nervous about something. And they're not trying to learn all of that at the same time as starting an academic course. I know there's more colleges who are doing something similar in a bridging week. Some colleges call it that. But, some universities have Freshers' Week. I think otherwise Cambridge has a Freshers' 3 days before it all kicks off properly. So this is where the induction week just gives everybody a little more time to get an idea of what is coming next before we throw in all the new academic side of things. So yes, I think that's how it can work. It can also still be a little bit overwhelming coming to a room meeting 50 strangers, but I think you all interact on a WhatsApp group beforehand, so again it's all kind of was I not supposed to know about the WhatsApp group? Anyway, but it's all kind of bringing in everybody getting to know each other and slowly, so it's not all brand new when we start throwing interesting new academic concepts at them as well.
Absolutely. And on that note, I actually want to talk to Marika because, as I mentioned, your teaching is concentrated in many ways around preparing students for the study of language, isn't it? And so I wanted to ask you, from that perspective, what kinds of core skills do you want to see students develop right from the beginning?
From the beginning, one of the main things I want them to get out of my teaching is to develop a methodological awareness. It's being able to critically evaluate sources. It's being able to answer the question, not only what do we know, but also how do we know it? Where do you get your information from? And that is both in relation to academic sources, but also in relation to primary materials, primary texts. And secondly, it's when we look at specifically at the languages as such, what I hope they will also develop is a metalinguistic awareness. It's to think about language as an academic subject, not just English literature or French literature, but to really think about how do we use language? How has that changed over time? What does it mean? And then also to be able to think about their own language use from that perspective, which will then feed into their writing skills. And thirdly, I think what it ties in with that is also that I would like to them to develop some cross-cultural awareness. The idea that time and place are crucial for understanding any phenomenon of the humanities, including language use. And so to think about language variation and language diversity as inherently positive things, and to be descriptive in their study of language rather than prescriptive, not to let go of this idea that there is a standard English, and rather see language as the expression of the diversity and variety that we see in the world around us. And again, that is something that they then can bring their own experiences into. And so I think those are essentially the core and most important things that I would hope that they get out of it.
Absolutely. Well, I co-teach with you, and I can confirm that this is what I think you do emulate in your teaching. And we do have, don't we, this academic literacies course that was spearheaded by our colleague Corinne Ruffley, who she wanted to embed within the foundation year a set of skills-specific seminars. So each week there would be a seminar in Michaelmas term or in the Lent term of the programme, fondly referred to as ACLITs, academic literacies, where students would be invited to focus on specific skill acquisition. And this could be as broad as something like, when you're interpreting an argument, treat the argument and the writer generously. What does it mean to bring an open mind to the reading of literary texts or philosophical texts, rather than this impulse that we may have to read eisegetically, to read our positions into the text, to want to use the text as foils for our own ideas. So I wondered, Ollie, your experience of going along to some of these ACLIT sessions across the year, what do you think's been perhaps most useful from a student perspective to have these opportunities to think really deliberately about skill acquisition?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think firstly, having these ACLITs scheduled on the actual, on the calendar, I think it's a really big thing, because I think a lot of people coming to Cambridge, especially myself, I was really nervous about the language I'm using in essays, and also just the way I approach studying. And before I even went into these lessons, it was nice to know that was being thought of before we even started. So certain ACLIT sessions talking about, what sources are you using? Don't maybe cite this magazine article, maybe cite a primary source using Google Scholar. And so things like that, it was really nice, and it elevated it got rid of a lot of my fears, because just knowing that it would be handled and knowing that we would discuss those things meant that, okay, instead of having to stay up all night worrying, am I going to be referencing properly, or are these skills going to develop, I knew they were going to be taken care of. And I knew, if you read ahead and looked at the schedule and saw, okay, in week 4 we're looking at referencing it, week 6 we're looking at how to do this and that, you knew you shouldn't have to worry about it right now, because if it was something you had to worry about right now, it would have been programmed a lot earlier. I think another thing about the academic lit sessions was it was like they're slightly more informal than just a normal lecture. People were able to talk about things and discuss, how they get. Some people were having a conversation about how they did well in certain things, and I think it's funny that you talk about the reading generously one, because that's the one I think a lot of people go back to, because that actually was such an important ACLIT for me, because it was during a time when we were nearly writing our summative assessments. So these are big essays that are marked, and we're also writing our extended project. So the idea of referencing and who you're referencing and how you're referencing was quite a big part of the time, and reading generously changed my mind, because a lot of the time when I'm trying to cite something, I would go to the article and think, okay, is it saying what I want it to say? And I'm finding quotes and I'm like, okay, that's good for me. But actually trying to genuinely understand what we are authors getting at, not just this quote, but the whole thing, reading it properly, trying to read it from their perspective was really nice. And actually, when I'm reading back from my own work, and I sometimes be a bit critical of myself, I have to actually go, well, actually, maybe I should read myself more generously and think, that's what I was trying to get at. Maybe it wasn't making the most sense at the time. But yeah, I think a lot of the time, ACLIT sessions themselves, I think they're just nice to know that things were being covered. Sometimes, when you write these long essays and you're getting really worried about certain things, about, the way your writing style or how you're framing the extended project. That was another ACLIT we did. You become quite worried about them, but then you realise, okay, actually, this is something we've covered. So yeah, they're really nice. They're really useful.
It's giving you tools that are kind of explicitly demarcated alongside your courses, that you can kind of have notes, as you say, on how to frame something, what makes a good introduction, what kind of sources are viable academic sources. Yeah. That's really helpful. And this is something that you really care about, Marika, isn't it? Sort of inducting our students into this business of resourcing credible academic sources, because I teach with Marika quite a lot, and it's one of your bugbears, isn't it? That, why is this student citing YouTube? So how would you say that you embed attention to that question in your teaching?
That is a very good question, and that is indeed true. I can show clemency in Michaelmas term, but by Lent term, I really can't. I think so. For a large part, it starts in induction week, right? So it's an induction week that we have a first session on scholarly sources, on how you take good notes, and how you use your notes to write essays, and on plagiarism, and on what sources to use, what the difference is between an academic source and a non-academic source. And then I think throughout teaching, it's a matter of modeling that. So we always have really good reading lists that we provide for each lecture, for each seminar, and I also always try to engage with those sources in my lectures, in my PowerPoints. I then, especially in seminars and supervisions, get students to critically evaluate the sources they use, both primary as well as secondary sources. And with regards to the secondary sources, I get them to explicitly discuss methodology. I have this one very concrete example where I have two articles that are both trying to examine how children view their multilingual identity. But both studies take a slightly different approach to answering that question. Both get children to draw, but the task they set is really different, and the way in which they interpret those drawings are really different. And so to get students to think about that, it makes it really concrete. Really concrete way to answer that question, like what do we know and how do we know it? And so to build that in throughout teaching, I think hopefully really helps them develop that awareness. And then also just lots of scaffolding, right? Like in the first term, we take things just really step by step, and then by Lent term, generally they feel a bit more comfortable with using sources and what they can and can't use. And one example from that, of course, is that in one of our papers, Ruth, where we had a formative assessment in Michaelmas term, where we asked students to write a word history of themselves, because this was in the context of the history of the English language, and we wanted them to essentially do etymology. But it was quite clear at the time, from after 2 rounds of doing that, 2 years, that students found it quite difficult to navigate the resources and write a 1,200-word essay on that. And so instead, we pivoted and for the formative assessment gave them a more standard essay question, and then instead used a seminar to think about how can you do etymology, how can you prepare certain etymologies that you can then use in your revision for the exam, that you can then harness as an example for various essay plans. But I think that it's that process of learning, how do you find sources, what sources can you use, that is just something that we need to really model and teach. And I think that the academic lits have been a huge help in that as well. They weren't there in the first year, and they were really introduced in the second year as part of that of our awareness that students needed more support with this. We had in the first year built it in each of the papers individually. We dealt a bit with, how do you reference properly? How do you avoid plagiarism? After the first round of formative assessments, we all gave feedback. We helped students deal with the feedback. But so to have dedicated sessions, as you say, allows it for us more to focus on our paper-specific considerations, while at the same time for the students alleviate some of that pressure of, when will it be dealt with? Because we knew it was going to be dealt with, but the students wouldn't. And so to have a dedicated space for that, and also have easy to find notes on all the things that we discuss, rather than across the papers, hidden in, supervision 4 of that paper and supervision 5 of that paper, I think was really helpful.
I agree. And it's really interesting hearing you talk about our experience of teaching that assignment, of the etymological assignment, because I think it was a learning experience for us, wasn't it? That I think by the time you get to the point where you're teaching, you've got to a stage where you do things by default and you forget that process of having to learn where you find your material. So I think we sort of expected almost too much of our students. We expected that process had become sedimented, when in fact we needed to model it more explicitly, didn't we? And that was the sort of rationale for saying, okay, here's how you do an etymology, right? This is where you start. And so every process for a teacher and for the student is a process of learning, isn't it? And you're nodding, Deb. So
I mean, I can't say how thrilled I am to hear all of this. I mean, the sort of modelling and the scaffolding are profoundly important, and coming on to something, I remember being asked sort of a lot in the first week. I think I sort of jumped in when one of 1 year's foundation year lot in the induction week asked a student tour guide, how do you write a good history essay? And I think that was the first question they asked, and it was like, chill your boots, you're going to learn about all of that. If you knew how to write a good history essay now, there would be no point in you being on the course. But, you are going to learn all of this. And I think there's, certainly thinking back to when I was an undergraduate, and I assume it's somewhat similar here, there is still that assumption that students, of course, as they practice and they do essays and they learn about sources and things like that, will pick it up. Will pick it up from the feedback, or pick it up from just modelling, or pick it up from the scaffolding and the big kind of finger pointing of going, this is important. And yes, that is part of it, but there's also something with the academic literacy sessions about being specific, about being able to say, this is how this works, and this is why, and this is what we mean by this phrase in the feedback, and how you go away and use it, or this is how you go and use a library catalogue, or this is how you evaluate a source. Yes, all of that will be modelled, all of that will be scaffolded and embedded within the teaching content of your various papers. But it's also vital at this stage, and part of that learning process, to kind of go, and here's a session on it specifically. Partly because of what you said, Ollie, is they kind of, you're kind of picking it up in the ether, but actually it's really good to be able to go, I know it's been dealt with, rather than going, has it been dealt with? Have I missed it? I know I still struggle with this. There is an academic literacy session on it generally. So that's why I think the academic literacies is important, because they cover a lot of the questions I generally get asked at the beginning.
Absolutely.
So,
and one of the things that both you and Marika have already said a few words about already, Deb, is feedback. And this is where I was going to go with my next question. And I want to come to Ollie first about this. So obviously, one of the major ways that students at university can develop their skills and improve their knowledge is via feedback. You're submitting work constantly, aren't you? Yeah. You've already mentioned that we have these formative assessments, and these take place in every paper in the midpoint of term, where you're given an opportunity to practice writing an essay. You get some formative feedback. It doesn't affect your overall grade, but it provides you with some help for later summative assessments. I wanted to ask you, Ollie, do you see feedback as a major part of how you learn? Yeah,
definitely. Because of the way the course is laid out, we also, not just formatives, we also do supervisions, and we submit a bit of work. Most weeks we submit a bit of work for supervisions for every paper, and we get some feedback for that. So that's kind of like the weekly feedback where you can, it's not the most in depth, but you can get some feedback. You see where you're going with it, and you can kind of start to see, okay, I want to go down this route or this route, and actually I tried exploring something here, it didn't really work. And same with the formative. So it was a formative. I, especially last term, found myself taking a bit more risk in my writing style, and taking a bit more risk in what sources I'm going to use and how I'm going to explore it. And okay, I'm going to use a different perspective than I normally do, because I knew if it went wrong, I'll get told it went wrong. This is where you went wrong, actually. But actually, this is where you're going right with it. And it was nice to explore that, because actually I think that's the best way my writing style has improved this over the last year, is because I kind of had the mindset that with formative work and supervision work, the feedback, if it isn't a great mark, but that's going to be the feedback that makes me improve more. But also with some the better feedback, something that I've learned to do, thanks to study skills help, is reading the good feedback and not just saying, okay, you've gotten a really good mark, and leaving it there and being like, okay, I must not do this again. It's about what's the deeper meaning of the feedback. Don't just take the great feedback, great like lovely comments as what it is. Also look at that. This is how you're going to improve, and that's something that I feel like has been really beneficial to me over the last year. Thinking about, okay, what's the feedback saying? Is there common themes in the feedback? So, like I said earlier, one of my biggest worries was my academic writing and my writing style. Never was great at A-level and wasn't much better at GCSE. And when I was applying for the foundation year, and when I actually got here, I was really worried, okay, it's going to be a big crux. A lot of the language I was using was more common language, which we're kind of talking about with Romanticism paper right now. And I thought I'd have to use all this fancy language. But actually, that issue was big. It was a decent issue, but it was also about structure, something that I'd never really thought about before, because it was just pill paragraphs at A-level. So learning how to actually structure an essay, learning how to write an essay, learning what language to use here, and actually learning how to use conjunctions properly, not just chucking them here, there and everywhere, is a really big part. And I think feedback for a lot of students can be quite daunting, especially at the start of Michaelmas. We got a formative feedback, and I was quite worried because I got some marks I wasn't very happy with. But actually learning how to appreciate the feedback, and I'm pretty sure there's act on that, and how to use your feedback properly, really, really helped. And confidence as well, being able to take feedback, bad feedback, properly, and taking it on the shoulder and thinking, how can I improve from this? And taking good feedback and being like, okay, give myself some credit, but how can I improve from this? But yeah, feedback has been really important for me, I'll say.
I'm really glad to hear it. That's music to my ears as an educator. Excellent. And, Marika, I thought I'd ask you again, what kinds of approaches to student feedback do you take? Both as a teacher, as Ollie says, you're required week on week to provide short comments, but you're also an examiner. So you've got to provide that more formal feedback too. So have you developed your practice over the past 3 years while you've been working on the programme, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the major things that we changed across all papers after the first year was the requirement to return student feedback before the supervision, so that students know before coming to meet us how they did, what was good and what needed improvement, and that also would give them then the opportunity to ask questions about it to us in the supervisions. I think that has helped, because where you point out that students have made a really good point, they're usually much more keen to bring it up in the supervision and to speak up. And if there is something about the feedback that they might not fully understand, or that they're asking, how can I improve on this, they can actually then ask that in that supervision, and not a week later when they see you next, or in an email. It's more done while it's in their heads, while it's in their brains, while they're thinking about it. I think I've also increased the amount of formative feedback that I give. It used to be much more 1 or 2 lines, whereas now I write mini essays in the comment box. Yeah, I often am limited by the word limit on my comment box rather than anything else. So I think that has really developed. The fact that we have a session in the ACLITs on feedback literacy, I think, has also greatly improved, has helped students indeed interpret what we mean when we say, be clearer, be more precise. I think that has really helped. And just to not take our feedback negatively. Like the reasons why we write what we write is to help you improve. You gain very little from half an essay on our end on how brilliant some of your points are. Yes, we point out what's good, but then you're here to learn, and also we want you to develop to your full potential, and we know that you have that potential. So to see that as a positive thing that can help you do better, rather than as any form of criticality towards you as a person. And so that is from a supervisor's perspective. I think as an examiner, well, you can speak to this as well, Ruth, of course. I think that we have, over the years, gotten a really good sense of what we can get our students to achieve in their summative essays and in their exams. And so when we mark the summative assessments at the end of Michaelmas and at the end of Lent term, we give our students feedback and a really clear idea of what grade boundary they're working in, but we don't actually give marks, because we try to be descriptive in our feedback and not give them a number that they can, stare themselves blind at, and just to really try and listen to us and emphasize that. And I think that is also, we've gotten better at that over the years. I think we've developed our marking and our feedback practices to really reflect the marking scheme that we use, so that students really know what is expected of them and how they can achieve that.
Absolutely. And I'm going to come to you now, Deb, because you're kind of like a mediator figure, aren't you, between these two sides of the coin? You can be, because you often are there for students who sometimes are frustrated perhaps with the feedback they've received.
Yes. It can be a case of, some of it is bringing their school experiences with them. If they've been told, this is a lazy paragraph, or you've not gone into enough detail here, or too descriptive, or it kind of goes straight back into some of the things they're bringing with them from school. Or conversely, they may have written essays at school that were judged to be quite good by that marking criteria. But I find at university as well, and a kind of part of this is challenging the students to think differently. We have to do a lot of almost unpicking of what works at school. This goes back to some of the questions I get asked a lot about. There's a lot of reading, and you've not given me the specific reading that is going to be on the test. And it's like, no, because that's not what the course is about. And so I think that sometimes I do get comments on the feedback where they've kind of gone, well, I've done this, or I can't do it this particular way. Where I feel that you guys have been really good with some of the feedback is precisely some of the phrasing that you were saying, Marika, where it's like, be a bit clearer on this. You're not trying not to frame it negatively. You're also referring back as well to the marking scheme, so you're putting it in context. It's why it's in this particular band. You're showing it's not kind of you've just taken against a particular student's way of writing, or you don't agree with the idea they put forward. It's just not a good argument for the way they've made it. You're able to show that it works within that mark scheme. I think as well, that idea of building on the feedback is, it's not only why the essay hasn't hit a particular band in the feedback, but how it might improve. So it could be, this section is good, it meets this bit, but to make it better, you could be doing this. And I think all of you do that within your feedback. And it does take practice, because when you're reading essay after essay, I'm sure you have your shorthands and your internal thoughts on it. So to be able to phrase it in a way that is useful for people, and for those who have study skills sessions or for their DOS or their tutor to use, it's all really useful, but it does take practice in phrasing that as well.
And it's quite interesting that you say that it does indeed take practice, because we all come from our own disciplinary backgrounds, and especially in the first year, it was quite interesting. So Ruth and I come from the same faculty of divinity, but we do vastly different aspects of religious studies. Ruth, you're a classic theologian. I'm much more of a linguist, a historian, Second Temple Jewish studies. But our marking was quite, in our marking, we were quite close together because we come from that same faculty background, that same context in which we have been marking for years. Whereas with some of our other colleagues, there was a bit more of a difference in how we formulated our feedback, and so I think we've developed that to be much more convergent with each other as a team.
Absolutely. And when you were talking, another thing struck me, which is what Ollie was saying before about cohort cohesion with the induction week. I think the same thing goes on throughout the year between colleagues and our knowledge of the students. As you were saying, Deb, it's, we want to do our jobs well. We want to make sure that our feedback makes sense in each individual case, that the student is told whether their essay fits into this band or this band. But we're also tracking each individual student's progress, and we're getting to know them, we're getting to see them as individuals, and we want them to do really well. So we have an idea of where they might be heading if they only manage to develop these skills. So if you're thinking of it holistically, you can see, gosh, well, that essay was really good for this reason, and that other assessment they produced had these really good qualities. If we can get them to really establish these habits and encourage them in this direction, they will be getting gradually more and more effective, just almost automatically. Yes. And I think that's, when we write feedback, we are writing it in the formative context with a knowledge of the student and a sense of where they're at and where they should be going. So I think that also helps us, doesn't it? The fact that we are in this situation where we're seeing the students a lot, we're seeing them week on week, we're seeing them develop, we're seeing them as a cohort. So I think all of these factors, as well as Marie, because you said that our knowledge of each other after 3 years has gotten a lot better. And we were saying in a previous podcast, I can start to anticipate what Corinne might think of a particular essay or a particular question, and you can kind of already sort of see that distance. We're coming towards the sort of the final couple of questions that I want to ask you all, and we've already been thinking quite a lot about the distinctive nature of our teaching. So we've thought about supervisions and what supervisions can allow, and the fact that we offer feedback. One of the other things that really characterises the teaching on the foundation year is that we actually do a lot of on-site teaching, don't we? We love a field trip. We love taking our students outside of the normal lecture halls that we go to. What do you think is the value of this kind of on-site learning? So, for example, we have a King's College Chapel paper where we take our students into King's College Chapel, because how can you teach about the chapel without going into it? We, on our historical linguistics paper, Marika, don't we go to the Parker Library at Corpus Christi College, where they have this amazing collection of Old English manuscripts. I wanted to ask all of you, and Ollie from a student perspective, what do you think might the value be from a student support perspective of this on-site and field trip learning?
I think with the field trip, it's being able to see things in context is my thinking about it. From a slightly different perspective, and not coming at it so much from the academic benefits of it, sometimes I think it's good just for the students to get outside the Cambridge bubble a bit, even if it is to the King's College Chapel, which is in Cambridge.
Very much in the bubble.
Very much in the bubble. It is still a day outside of the college. It is still a day where it's not necessarily in the library reading literature, which may or may not be considered quite dry. It is a chance to be somewhere else for a bit in a group of people that hopefully, because you know each other well enough, you're there as a bit more of a community, and you can remind yourself of the connections that you have with each other, as well as doing the academic side of things. It is just that chance of a change is as good as a holiday type thing. It's a change in routine. That can also be challenging. It can be challenging to, as you were saying, Ollie, before, and as I know as a disabled person, you're going to a building or a site that it's not set up for you and you don't know what you're going to. So again, I think that's something that the foundation year has taken very seriously in making sure they provide information about the field trips. You, as facilitators of the field trips, you know those venues well. So we can encourage students to talk to you about their concerns, and you can reassure them that, yes, there are places to sit. Nobody's going to mind if you take a stall. All of those kind of things, because there's still that sense of people needing permission to do things, when actually that's just part of what the venue does. But if that's not clear, that's going to make somebody very nervous about it. So there's definite positives, but I think it also needs to be, much like other elements of the course, presented in the right way, acknowledging that some people will find that the idea of a field trip challenging. What's going to help? Information, making sure that's available, and making sure that students know they can have a quiet conversation with somebody who knows the space. It's all very important to make a field trip successful.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's interesting that you're saying, it takes them a bit out of their own, their own space, the college or the West Hub where a lot of our teaching happens. But I think in taking them to all these other places across Cambridge and beyond, what we also want to instill with that is a sense of belonging. Like you get to be here and you do belong here. You do belong in this really old, incredibly rich library looking at manuscripts that are 1,000 years old. You belong in King's College Chapel, which is the one of the ultimate postcards. If you think about Cambridge, you see King's College Chapel. Well, here you are, and here you belong studying it. And I think that is also just a really important message to give our students on these various field trips.
Yeah, thank you, Marika. And I was going to ask you, Ollie, what have you made of the field trips?
I think firstly, it's just a really nice experience to go out for the day and do something different, like going out and having a bit of fun. It's like going on a school trip again, but as adults, and it's a bit, sometimes it's like you come quite aware, actually, you're a bit like childish, like you're all on a bus and it feels like you're going somewhere nice, and because you are going somewhere nice, and it's a different way of learning, right? It's just recall, helps with recall. So when, I was doing my summative exam in Fitz Library a few months ago now, actually, and I recalled something, but I ended up writing about because I remembered, the field trip, this is what we did in the field trip. And it's really nice, and taking maybe a bit of a broader perspective, it builds a cultural capital, especially of Cambridge, and there's this big feeling, and it's not maybe grounded, but of imposter syndrome, not just as you get to Cambridge as a Cambridge student. I think a lot of people feel that, but as a foundation year student, I think we feel it quite a lot. I've not really had any negative experiences being labelled as a foundation year student, but I know some people have. And being able to build this kind of rapport with the city, and being able to go to King's College, which, otherwise seems quite locked off, and it's kind of a big thing because every time you go past it, you see there's a bunch of people there, and you're thinking, maybe one day I'll go in there, and we have. And seeing other things, maybe smaller parts of the city, which you wouldn't really think about if you weren't being taken there in the first place, and seeing, when we look at different churches and different chapels, and, there are things that are always there in the city, but you never really think of them as their own, like their own thing, until you're learning about what it means for the city. And actually, what it means is that when I've met other friends who aren't on the foundation year, who didn't get to that paper, I'm pointing things out and being like, this is a fun fact, and we're all learning something. But yeah, I mean, for the on-site, like we go off-site and we go to these places, like I said earlier, it's just a new way of learning and fostering that knowledge, and it's just fun. Most of it is just fun, and you're not really having to take many notes. You can have a bit of a laugh, and it's a break. And like you said, sometimes change is as good as a holiday, and sometimes it is that. Sometimes you can feel like the schedule's getting a bit, the routine's getting a bit repetitive now, and every day I'm doing the same thing, going to the West Hub and I'm going back to the library, and But then having this time, having these like 8 hours maybe in a day where you're going on a trip, you can't really blame yourself for not getting some work done if you're sitting. No one's going to get work done on the bus. Actually, I did see someone get work done on the bus before, and that's quite impressive. But you're going to just enjoy it. You're going to have a conversation with someone that you probably haven't had a conversation with in a few weeks because you're both being a bit recluse because you're doing the exams or the revision for the exams anyway. But yeah, I really, really enjoy the trip, and we've got one coming up, which I'm really looking forward to. So yeah.
Amazing. It's really good to hear because I love a field trip. I really do. This is
Ruth is nicknamed the Queen of Field Trips.
Absolutely. How do you? We've been teaching an art paper this term. So the human body and visual art. How do you talk about art without going and looking at art? It's just nonsense, isn't it? So we've been spending a lot of time in museums and collections and galleries, and it's been wonderful. I have a final question to wrap us up. So, and this is a kind of critical reflection question, because we have touched a little bit about the fact that sometimes, Deb, you've been mentioning there's a tension. Things that are perceived on the whole as good things, it doesn't mean that they're without issue or struggle or difficulty, and it's important for us to take a moment to think about how we might plan these things effectively so that the difficulty doesn't overwhelm. And this is something we might think about in regards to the whole enterprise of studying something like the foundation year. What I mean by that is on our first podcast, some of our students were explaining that one of the most, if not the most valuable things that this course was offered was intellectual challenge. You come here, you're pushed out of your comfort zone. You are learning things that you never imagined you may learn about. As you say, Ollie, you can walk down Cambridge Street and point out features of the architecture now and think about Cambridge as a medieval town. And that way of seeing, that way of knowing wasn't necessarily something an A-level student could have foreseen or predicted. My question is, do any of you have any thoughts on how to get this balance right between maintaining intellectual challenge and rigour on the one hand? Is something we all hold dear. We really care about the intellectual play, don't we? How do you get the balance right between that, the academically demanding nature of a course like this, and student support? I don't think they're in tension with one another. I don't think that you have to have one or the other. But I think we do have to think about how we manage that balance. So I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting question, especially as there are an increasing number of students who I would say mental health challenges, perhaps sitting with that discomfort of suddenly being challenged, can be problematic for anybody, particularly those perhaps who are not anticipating some of those challenges. And for me, I think one of the best things that we can try and do, and I do think the foundation year does this quite well, is coming at it from, it's a curiosity point of view, but it's also mutual respect. I think you all come at it, even within supervisions, which can be challenging when students are first getting used to hearing their own voices and being confident in their own voices. It is finding a way of kind of going, that's a useful insight, or being aware perhaps of somebody's history that may make a subject a little more challenging, and so perhaps giving a bit of a heads up before the discussion and sort of saying to a student, it's fine if you need to leave for a little while, feel free to come back when you're able. There are ways of having those conversations that can be challenging, but I think as long as it's all rooted in that kind of respect and understanding, you can push students a little bit outside of their comfort zone. It's almost when they're kind of like thrust into that uncomfortable position that becomes slightly more problematic and probably much more challenging and could cause issues later on. So, I think there is As you say, there's not a tension as such, but it's more, again, how you do it rather than avoiding it completely. We don't want to avoid it, but it's doing it being mindful, and it's doing it being respectful of where a student has come from. It's taking them by the hand a little bit and just sort of standing back and going, we're here if you need us, rather than abandoning them in a scary space.
Throwing them into the deep end of a swimming pool.
Yes.
Part of maintaining that academic rigor in a situation like that also involves teaching them some of the tools they need and that they can take with them into a TriPOS degree, into the study for TriPOS. So teaching them their own techniques, their own tools, where to go look for support, and at the same time on our end, it's taking them by the hand in the first term and then slowly letting going a little, and so it's indeed making sure that they know we're here if they need anything more, but we start out with much more support, and we do slowly and responsibly let go and just teach them how to become more mature academically as well, so that when they do get into an undergraduate degree, they ideally, from our perspective, start with a head start compared to first years that haven't had a foundation year, that haven't been taught yet how to write an academic essay, how to engage in a supervision, how to make the most out of Cambridge.
Absolutely. Ollie, from the student perspective, what would you say? Do you experience, well, like our other students, sometimes you're outside of your comfort zone? And tell us a little bit more about how you see these issues.
Yeah, I think the thing about academic rigour is that it's not actually beneficial without the proper support there. And when there's too much of it, you can become flustered and actually you end up shying away from it and becoming a bit scared to start actually doing the work. And, it is very daunting. And that's one of the ways I describe the foundation year is, the workload, it can be a bit tough, but if you keep up to it and you keep ahead of it and you take advantage of the support systems in place, it actually isn't that scary after a while. And actually it's not scary anymore for me at all anymore. But I feel like the support system, especially in the foundation year, are extremely beneficial for me. But I think when I've saw this question, I thought about it quite a lot actually, and I'm thinking that because of my disabilities, I've always had to kind of ask for help and be comfortable in asking for help, and looking at the support that we have and taking advantage of it to the fullest. So, for example, I get support, I get study skills tutors, I get a mentor. I'm not shy to email a teacher. I'm sure all of you have got an email from me at 1 a.m. at one point saying, "Can I please have some help?" But some students aren't willing to do that. Some students never done it before and don't feel comfortable doing that. They feel like they're a bit of a hassle. They're going to be a hassle you if you're going to ask for help. And as you know, from my experience, you guys aren't hassled by that. But so I think with the academic rigour, I think there's a good mix in the foundation year, because we are getting pushed out of our comfort zone at certain points. But it's about knowing and feeling comfortable as a student to go, I'm really outside my comfort zone here. I really need some support. Because if you're not comfortable doing that, and I think something that the foundation year does well is, a lot of us do feel comfortable doing that. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then you just don't learn at all. You don't actually, a lot of people, for myself, from my own experience, you don't pick up the book. You're thinking, it's too much. I'm going to focus on something different, put it aside. And the next thing you know, you can't get started on it because you really are behind and it's been too much. But I think the most beneficial part of the foundation year has, for me, other than just the support system itself, has been being pushed out my comfort zone enough to the point where I'm learning and progressing, but not to the point where I'm thinking, I've had too much, I can't do it anymore. Because I've been able to grow as an academic. I think my writing style has significantly improved. The way my whole ethos to academics has improved, I think. But that's been because of the support system. That's because it's not been too much. And when it has got too much, because we, in the interdisciplinary course, there are things I'm more comfortable with. I did at A-levels, and there's things I'm not comfortable with at all. And the fact that I'm able to talk to different teachers about that from all, with their own backgrounds has been really useful. Whereas, sometimes I'm able to do it myself and I don't need that support. So it's just been It's been a really, really strong, a really good mix in my opinion. And I feel, even if I give a bit of advice, if you are a student listening to this, like, don't feel afraid to ask for some support, because that's going to be beneficial.
And it sounds like your experience as a support worker has really helped you with this, because you've not only had your own experience of advocating for yourself, so that it's just become a bit second nature now. You don't feel embarrassed about asking for help, and when you do it, you know that you do that in the knowledge that you're going to get the help and improve and develop those resources Marika was talking about to help yourself. Whereas you can see in your peers, for many reasons, Deb was mentioning mental health, if you're already feeling a bit low, it's an extra effort, isn't it, to sort of go and ask for support with something. Or if you're already feeling quite negative about the work you've done, you give yourself reasons to not try anymore, don't you? So I think it's really helpful hearing you run us through those thought processes, that a balance is needed, that support alongside the confidence from the members of staff that are teaching you that you can do it. You know, we're sort of running along. It's like the kind of, all of my analogies have to do with sort of like encouraging babies and small children, but it's like, you know, when someone's learning to ride a bike, you're running alongside them, and then the stabilizers come off, and it's that kind of...
I think some of it, though, as well, is kind of going, okay, you can approach something in a different way and still achieve the same end result. You don't have to do it in the same way that everybody else does.
Yeah.
But it can feel like you have to. And I think that is also where some of this support can come. I've been talking to students recently where they were struggling with something but didn't think there was anything that could be done to help. But we broke it down into its actual issue. And it was, well, you could do it this way, or you could approach it this particular way. And it just took a little bit of talking to somebody about it who may be sympathetic or familiar with the issue, and be able to kind of go, here's a different strategy. Yes, that thing is big and scary. Don't run straight at it, come at it from the side. You can manage this. So I think that's another thing as well. It's kind of just considering there may be different ways of achieving that end goal, and sometimes that's the support, is talking that through. We're not going to do it for you, but we'll help you develop those skills along the way.
Thank you all so much. This is the end of our discussion, but I've really enjoyed hearing from all of you about your perspectives on how we manage this careful balance between providing this academically rigorous programme, but also making sure that students... The word empowered is used a lot in our culture, but I think it is the relevant word to use there, that students feel empowered to learn for themselves and to start to learn independently, as they will be expected to do at degree level. So thank you for your time. I hope our listeners have also enjoyed us talking today. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please do look out for others in the series.